Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Mishnah Mastery. Hooray! We've got a live virtual studio audience, and we are ready to get underway, are we not, fellas? With Maseches Arachin, the final two chapters, Chapter 8 and Chapter 9, Perek Ches and Perek Tes. So without further ado, let's get it up on the screen for you to be able to see, and let's crack on and see how we do with these particular chapters. This is very exciting. It's always nice to finish a Masechta, and I look forward to a huge eruption of Mazel Tovs as we make our way through the two Parakim. So we are still talking about this 50-year cycle that we call the Yovel, and the way in which property, different types of property, would change hands, and the concept of pledging these properties and redeeming these properties. So we're still within that world. And fundamentally, if someone was to redeem their ancestral field, their Sedei Achuzah, that they had consecrated, then the halacha is that they should pay an extra fifth. And so an interesting thing emerges that Kohanim benefit more from someone else redeeming a field because it goes back to the Kohanim at the end of Yovel. And that would be preferable for Kohanim, even though for the real owner, they would have to pay an extra fifth. So if you don't understand what I just said, don't worry, I'm just reading my notes. So here we go. Let's have a look at Perek Ches Mishnah Aleph. Says the Mishnah, Hamakdish es sadehu b'shah she'eino Yovel. If a person consecrates his field to Hekdesh, b'shah she'eino Yovel, at a time when the Jubilee year was not observed. Why would the Jubilee year not be observed? Because after Sancheriv and the exile of the 10 tribes, the laws of Jubilee of Yovel did not apply, because we didn't have most Jews living in Eretz Yisrael. So since there was no Yovel in place, there would be no way of redeeming the field to Kohanim. And since there was no Yovel in place, the preference for Kohanim would have been for the owner to redeem, because then they would get the extra fifth. So when Yovel was in place, it would have been preferable for someone else to redeem it, because then they would have got the land. But when Yovel wasn't in place, then it was preferable for the real owner to redeem, because then they would get the extra fifth that the owner would have to pay. So Mishnah says that when you consecrate your field during a period when the Jubilee year is not observed, then what would happen is Omrim lo psach ata rishon. So the treasurer of the Beis HaMikdash would say to the owner that you get first dibs. You get to open the bidding. How much would you offer to be able to redeem this field? Right? So when the owner would pay, so then there would be an extra fifth. So he would say first to the owner, you get first options. How much do you want to redeem it for? Because they would pay an extra fifth. But for everybody else, they wouldn't pay this extra fifth. There was an occasion when somebody consecrated his field because it wasn't a very impressive piece of land. It was a bit of a lousy piece of land. It was inferior quality. Amru lob sachat harishon. So the treasurer said to him, you get to open the bidding because you are the owner. Amar harehi sheli be'isar. So he said that it should be his for an isar, which is only a very small amount, an eighth of a peruta, or a 24th of a dinar. Amar Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says, Lo amazeh ela b'chabetza. So he didn't say he would purchase it for an isar, but rather he said he would purchase it for the value of an egg. Because when it comes to redemption, a person would either redeem with money or with the equivalent value of money. So he didn't say it was with an isar, he actually said it was with a beitza, but I think he was saying with an actual egg, or for the value of an actual egg. because that had a value to it, and you can either redeem with money itself or with something that has a value. Amar lo, and so he said to him, the treasurer said to him, Higiasacha, okay, it's yours. Nimsa mafsid isar v'sad Nimsa mafsid isar v'sadeu lefanav. And as a result, he lost the isar, and the field was his. Mishnah base. Omar echad, if a person was to say during the bidding, Harehi shali be'eser sla'im, that the field should be mine for the redemption of paying 10 selah, the echad omer be'esrim, and another one comes along and says he'll do it for 20. The echad omer be'shloshim, another one comes along and says he'll do it for 30. The echad omer be'arbayim, and the next one comes along and says he'll do it for 50. The echad omer be'chamishim, and the next one comes along and says he'll do it for 50. Chazar bo shel chamishim. Then what happens in this particular episode is the guy who said that he'll redeem it for 50 backs out. So he will take, I believe, the treasurer will take 10 selah from this guy, and then it will be redeemed by the person who bid 40. And that way, the temple coffers don't lose out. If the guy who had said that he would redeem it for 40 subsequently backs out, so then he's going to pay 10, and it's going to go back down to the guy who bid 30. If he backs out, the guy who bid 30, so he's going to have to still give something worth 10 selah, and then it's going to go to the guy who said 20. If that guy backs out, so he's going to give 10, and it's going to go back down to the guy who bid 10. If that guy backs out, so the Mishnah says, if the guy who bid 10 backs out, then the treasurer is going to sell the field for its value, and he's going to collect the remainder from the guy who bid 10, so that at the very least he's getting back this 10 seller. If the owner was to say that he will pay 20, and everybody else says that they'll pay 20, then the owner would get dibs first. Why? Because he's going to be paying that extra fifth. But I guess then, if he was to pledge 20 and others were to pledge 30 or 40 or 50, then it's going to go to them as a matter of priority. I wonder then what would happen if he pledges 20 and other people pledge 25. Because if they pledge 25, then that's still equal to the amount that he's going to have to pay. Because when we say he adds a fifth, it means that you've got 20, which divided by 4 would be 5. Yeah, 5 each. And then he's got to pay 5 on top of that, so that the sum total represents a fifth. So let's have a look. Omar Echad, if the owner says he's going to be 20, Amar Echad, Harehi Shali Be'esrim Be'achas, that he will pay 21, Ba'alim Nosnim Esrim V'Sheish. Then the owner would pay 26 to be able to get the field. But Esrim V'Shtayim, if one guy says that he's going to pay 22, then Habalim Nosnim Esrim V'Sheva, then the owner, were he to pay, is going to end up paying 27, because we're adding a fifth. When we say a fifth, we mean an extra 5 on the top of that. Be'esrim v'shalosh, if other people were saying, I'd be willing to pay 23, so Habalim Nosnim Esrim V'Shemona, then the owner is going to pay 28. Be'esrim v'arba, if they say 24, Habalim Nosnim Tisha v'esrim, then he's going to pay 29. V'chamisha v'esrim, if they say 25, Habalim Nosnim Shloshim, then the owner is going to pay 30. She'ein mosifin chomesh al iliyo shelzeh, because he's only going to add 1/5 to the amount that he bid, and does not add 1/5 to the addition of that of the other person, meaning that he doesn't have to meet the top bid, he just has to pay the chomesh on top of that bid. Um, so that's what you find. So Amar Echad Harehi Sheli Be'esrim V'Sheish. If a person came along and said that he would be willing to put in 26, Ratzu Habalim, if the owners want Litain Shloshim Echad V'Dinar, if they want to add and pay 31 plus a dinar, Habalim Kodmim, then the owners are going to take precedence. V'im Lav Omrim Higiyasacha, and if not, then it's going to go to the other person. So if you've got a situation where the owner is not willing to pay more cumulatively or with the chomesh included, then it's going to go to whoever is willing to pay the extra mark. Mishnah Dalid, we move on to a new concept called cherem, which we're going to be discussing until the end of this particular chapter. So the cherem, if it's pronounced like that and not charam, maybe it's charam, is a dedication. It's a specific oath of consecration which is mentioned in the Torah in the end of Bechukosai. By the way, this whole Masechta of Arachin, really, we started with Bahar, we've moved into Bechukosai. It's just going through the topics and concepts that come up in the verses of those two parashas. So there's two forms of cherem. There's the type of dedication where it's going to go directly to Kohanim, and then there's the type of dedication which can go to the Bedek Habayis. It can go to the upkeep of the Beis Hamikdash. So we're dealing first with charamim that are going to the Kohanim. So machrim adam mitzonam ibkara. A person can dedicate animals from his flock or from his cattle, which will go to the Kohanim. Me'avadav, from his slaves. Umishivchosav, or from his maidservants. Umishivchosav haknanim, or from his Canaanite maidservants, or his Canaanite slaves. Umisteach chuzaso, or from his ancestral fields. If he was to dedicate all of these of a particular type of property, then einan muchramim, then it would not be a valid dedication. It doesn't take effect, divrei Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar says in the verses where we talk about this dedication, it says mikol asher lo, anything from what you own, me adam umisteach chuzaso, from your personnel, from your ancestral fields, which he learns means you can't give all of it. So if a person was to pledge an entire field for a cherem, then Rabbi Elazar says you would not be able to do that, because there has to be a portion of these things. Rabbi Elazar ben Azari says, Ma im la gavoha, ein adam rashai la'acharim miskon chasav. If for the Almighty, for the Most on High, a person may not dedicate all of his property, al achas kama v'kama sheyehei adam chayiv liyos chas al nechasav. How much more so a person should be careful not to disperse the entirety of his assets for tzedakah. He should be mindful of not giving away everything to other people, because if you can't do it for Hashem, then you also wouldn't be able to do it for other people, says the Mishnah. Mishnah Hey, Hamacharim Beno, person who dedicates his son, Uvito, or his daughter, Avdo, or his slave, his Hebrew slave, V'shivchaso ha'ivrim, or his Hebrew maidservant, Usadei miknaso, or a field which he purchased, land which he has purchased. Einan muchramim, these things are not going to be dedicated. They're not considered dedicated. She'ein adam macharim davar she'eino shelo, because a person may not dedicate something which he does not own outright. He doesn't have total ownership over these things. Kohanim Levim, when it comes to Kohanim and Levim, einan macharim in divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says they are not going to be able to dedicate their property, whether it's movable property, assets, whether it's land. According to Rabbi Yehuda, they are not going to be able to dedicate anything. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Rabbi Shimon says, HaKohanim may not machrimin, Kohanim may not dedicate a cherem, shahacharamim shalahem, because really anything that gets dedicated, they have potentially the rights to anything that gets dedicated, and so they would not then have the ability to relinquish those rights. Halavim macharim, but Levim would be able to dedicate she'ein acharamim shalahem, because they don't have rights over things that are dedicated. Rabbi Omer nirin divrei Rabbi Yehuda b'karkaos. According to Rabbi, he would agree that Rabbi Yehuda is correct with regards to land, that it could be dedicated. Shneimar ki achuzas olam hu lahem, because as the verse says, the fields are going to be their perpetual possession. They cannot renounce that land. V'divrei Rabbi Shimon ben Metalton, and Rabbi Shimon appears to be correct with regards to movable property, which Leviim are allowed to dedicate. She'ein hacharamim shelahem, because dedicated property is not going to be theirs. So it can be a gift for Kohanim and not for Leviim. So you see a three-way machlokes over there as to the impact of whether Kohanim and Leviim can dedicate and what they can dedicate, whether it's land or whether it's movable possessions. Mishnah Vav. Chermei Kohanim ein lahem pidyon. So dedications of property for Kohanim, ein lahem pidyon, they have no ability to be redeemed. Ela nitanim lakohanim, rather they get given to the Kohanim and it becomes theirs. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beteira Omer, stam charamim lebedek habayis. If a person was to make a dedication without specifying whether it's for Kohanim or whether it's for temple upkeep, so the Mishnah says, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beteira says, that then an unspecified designation is going to go to bedek habayis. Shneimar, kol cherem kodesh kodoshim hu laHashem. All dedicated items are kodesh kodoshim, are most sacred laHashem, to the Lord, which indicates then that it means it goes to temple coffers. The rabbis say that dedications that don't have a specific specification go to the Kohanim. As it says in the pasuk, as a field dedicated, its possession shall go to the priest, to the Kohen. So they are learning from these verses in Bechukosai what would happen if an unspecified dedication was made. Im Kain, says the Mishnah, if so, if that's the case, then why did it say that verse, which Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says, that would indicate that they go to the temple coffers? Why would you need that verse? Why would you have that verse? Answers the Mishnah, Shehu chal al kodshe kodshim ve'al kodshim kalim. It's there to teach us that dedications, that these charamim can take effect on korbanos that are kodshe kodshim, of the highest order, as well as kodshim kalim, as well as for the lowest order, the lesser sanctity of korbanos. So if a person consecrated an animal for a sacrifice and then dedicated it to a kohen or to bedek habayis, that dedication is going to take effect. Although it wouldn't take effect on the body of the animal, rather it would apply to the financial stake in the offering, as you can see there in the explanation on the screen. Mishnah Vav, Machrim Adam es Kadashav. A person may dedicate his sacrificial animals. Ben Kodshe Kodshim, Uven Kodshim Kalim, like we just saw, learning out from that verse beforehand. Whether it is a high-level sacrifice or a low-level sacrifice, if it was a korban which was dedicated, then it can be done. Im neder, if it was a korban which had been a neder, meaning that he had specified a specific animal to be given as a korban, no senes adamim. So what happens is he has to leave that animal to die, and then he has to bring another. And if it dies, he gives that full value to the kohen. Im nadavar, if it was not a specific animal, but person said that they were going to bring a particular type of offering, then no senes tovaso. Then you have to give the monetary benefit Meaning, if the animal was to die, right? So a person says they're going to bring a specific type of animal, a specific type of korban, and that animal dies, so they don't have to replace it because they had pledged a korban of a particular nature, not a specific animal for a korban. So if they pledge a particular animal, a particular korban, and the animal dies, so they wouldn't have to replace. Therefore, if he then makes this dedication, he must give to the kohen the amount that he would pay in order to get the reward for having brought it as a kohen. So that's less than the original value of the actual animal, but there's still a financial value of how much he would have been willing to pay in order to get the sechar for the korban, which he now can't get because the animal has died. Oh, very, very clear. Fine. Shor ze olah. If he has a bull which is dedicated for a olah offering, going to be burnt up entirely. Omdim kama adam rotza litem b'shor ze la'alosa olah she'eno rashai. So then, what he would need to do is he would need to estimate how much money a person would be willing to give in order to sacrifice this animal as a burnt offering voluntarily, even though he is not permitted to do so. So that's how much he would then give to the kohen if he had pledged that particular bull, which he had dedicated or pledged as a korban olah, which he now wants to dedicate to a kohen. That's the amount that he's going to be estimating. Habachor, if it is a firstborn animal, bein tamim, bein balmum, whether it is pure, whether it is blemished, macharim inoso, it can be the subject of a dedication. Ketzah podinasa. So how is he going to redeem it? How are we going to know how much he has to be able to give? So the Mishnah says, "Hapodin omdin kama adam rotza litem b'bechol zeh litno leven bito leven achoso." So the person is going to estimate how much a person would be willing to give in exchange for that firstborn, in order to give it to a priest who is his grandson, or to a priest who is his grandson through his daughter, or a nephew through his sister. So how do you assess how much he can give? So he has to estimate how much he would be willing to pay, or how much a person would be willing to give in exchange, so that they could then give that animal to their grandson or to their nephew if they were a kohen. Right, and this is because a kohen wouldn't be able to do this, but a Yisrael would be able to do this if he was then giving it on to his priestly grandson or nephew. Rabbi Yishmael says, Kasav echad omer takdish. It says in one verse, takdish, that you shall consecrate with regards to a bechor. V'chasav echad omer al takdish. And it says in a different verse with regards to a firstborn animal, you shall not consecrate it. It's impossible to say that the Torah would insist that you should consecrate something when it's already said that you can't consecrate something. And it's impossible to say that the Torah would tell you that you can't consecrate something that you are allowed to consecrate. So we see from here this seeming contradiction in verses. So we see from over here, that you can consecrate a bechor through a particular value, i.e., a person can donate to the temple coffers the amount that he would be willing to pay for the right to give the firstborn to a particular priest, and you cannot consecrate it by a consecration for the altar. So so you can't change its status as one korban to another korban. So what we're seeing from Rabbi Yishmael is that the seeming discrepancy in the two verses teaches us that I can be macharim, I can dedicate a korban, even though it has the status of a korban. I can dedicate that as a cherem, but I wouldn't be able to change its status from one korban to a different korban. And that's why you can have a situation where the verse in one place says don't consecrate, and the verse in another place says consecrate. Because what it's teaching you is that you can be macharim it, but you can't rededicate it as a different korban. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we say Mazel Tov on completing chapter 8 of Masachet Arachin. You'll get it the second time round. Let's move on to chapter 9, the home stretch, guys. Chapter 9 of Masachet Arachin, the halachas of a man selling a field or a house. So Yovel is going to be back in play for these Mishnahs. So Hamocher es Sadehu b'shas hayovel, a person who sells his field at a time when Yovel is in place. So a person is not going to be redeemed, not going to be allowed to redeem it within the first 2 years of a sale. Shneimar, as the verse says in Bahar, b'mispar shnei tivuos yimkalach, according to the number of years of the crops he shall sell to you. So b'mispar shnei, so that teaches us that it has to be more than these 2 years. If during that time there was a period of blight, a period of famine, a period of mildew, a period where the produce rots, or it was shavius, or it was the Shemitah year, so the buyer would not be able to have any benefit from that land, eina ola min minyan, then that year is not going to count in the count of 2 years from the sale. Nara, if you plowed the field without planting, or hovira, or you left it fallow, ola min minyan, then those years would still count as as those first 2 years. Rabbi Elazar says, Machwer lo lifnei Rosh Hashanah, v'him le'aperes. Rabbi Elazar says, if you were to sell a field before Rosh Hashanah, when it was full of produce and you hadn't yet harvested it, and then the owner would redeem the field after 2 years, what you could find is that the buyer could enjoy 3 years crops worth within 2 years, because he received the field with a crop load, and then he had 2 years after that, so he can enjoy 3 years worth of crop for the price of 2. Mishnah base, Mechara larishon b'maneh. So when you've got this 50-year cycle of Jubilee, so you can sell a field up until that point. And once it hits the Jubilee year, the field is going to return to the original owner. But if the owner redeems the field before the Jubilee year, then, as we've said in the past, there's going to be a payment that reduces with each passing year until you get back to the Jubilee. So the Mishnah says, Mechara larishon b'maneh. If the owner of a field sold it to the first buyer for 100 maneh, for 100 dinars, for a maneh, umacha harishon lasheni b'masayim, and then the first buyer sells it on for 200 dinar, right? So eino mechashev elayim harishon. So when it goes back to the original owner, it's calculated only by that first price that he sold it for, even though the second guy sold it for 100 more. Shneimar la'ish asher machalo, because the verse says it connects it to the person to whom he had sold it. Mechara larishon b'matayim, if he sold it to the first guy for 200, umacha rishon lasheni b'maneh, and the guy sold it on to another owner for 100, eino mechashev elai macharon. So then the halacha says, the Mishnah says, that you're going to calculate it by the last buyer. Shneimar la'ish, because as it says, it goes to the ish, la'ish asher b'soicha, to the person that is in the field at the time. Lo yimkor b'rachok v'yigol b'karov. A person cannot sell an ancestral field which is far away and redeem with a field that is closer by. Barav yigol b'yafeh. Similarly, he can't sell a low quality field and redeem it using a high quality field. Lo yilva v'yigal. He may not borrow money and redeem the field. V'lo yigal l'chatzaim, and he may not redeem a field, or half a field. Uvahekdesh mutar b'chulan. But when it comes to redeeming a field from hekdesh, mutar b'chulan, all of these things would be permitted. And this is a stringency which applies to redeeming a field from an ordinary individual that would not apply to the more lenient redemption of a field from the temple coffers, from the temple treasury. Mishnah Gimel, talking about now selling houses within walled areas. So says the Mishnah, Hamocher bayis babate Arachin, a person who sells a house within the walls of within a walled city, meaning walled from the times of Yoshua ben Nun. So if you sell a house within a walled city from the time of Yoshua ben Nun, you can only redeem it within the first 12 months of sale. After that, it remains with the new owner. It's not like other fields or other property where the land returns to the ancestral owner at the time of Jubilee. So, Hamocher bayis bevate Arachin, a person sells a house within a walled city, harei goel miyad. This can be redeemed immediately within those 12 months. V'goel kol 12 chodesh, and he can redeem it and take it back, reassume possession of it within those 12 months. Harei zeh kamin ribis ve'ena ribis. And so it's kind of like interest, but not quite like interest. Because effectively what's happening is you're giving the money back to the guy that you bought, that you sold to, but it's not like ribis because the buyer lived there for free. Meis hamocher, if the seller was to die, yigal bano, then the son is able to redeem the property and take it back from the person that he sold it to. Meis halokeach, if the purchaser died, yigal miyad bano, then the son would be able to redeem it immediately. Then the seller can redeem it from the possession of the buyer's son. We only commence the calculation of this year from the time of sale, until a full year has passed, as it says in the pasuk. And when the verse says tamima, when it says a full year, this includes a leap year as well. So you could actually end up having more than a year from the time of sale. But Rabbi says, Rabbi says you give it, you count for the period of a year plus the length of the solar calendar, meaning that when we talk about having a year to redeem, a Shana Tamima, Rabbi says this doesn't mean a Jewish year, it doesn't mean a lunar year, it means a solar year. Mishnah Daled, Higiya Yom 12 Chodesh v'lo nigal. If the year passes and the redemption has not occurred, he has not, the original owner has not tried to buy it back, has not tried to redeem it back. Haya chalut lo. It belongs to the new guy. Echad alokeach ve'echad shenitan lo matana. Whether the guy had bought it or whether it was given to him as a gift. Shne'emar latz misus, because the verse says that you own it for perpetuity. You own it perpetually. Barishona haya nitman yom 12 chodesh hei chalut lo. At first, the buyer would try and hide himself away so that he couldn't be found, so that he would end up owning it. Hiskin Hillel Azakein, but Hillel came along and instituted Shehei Cholesh es Ma'osav Balishka. He instituted that the seller would place money in the chamber of the court, V'hei Shover Sadeles V'nichnas, and that I think in so doing you deposit the money with the beis din, and then the original owner can go and take ownership of the house. And if the guy wants to go and collect his money, he can go and do so. So the original owner can break and enter, so to speak, and take back his property because he's deposited the money safely with the beis din. And then the emasai shi'etz hala, and when the buyer is up for it, yavo v'yitol esma'osav, he can go to the beis din and take his money back. So he doesn't get the ability to hide himself away so that he can't be found and continue to own the property. The beis din can intercede on the original seller's behalf. Mishnah Hey. Kol shehu lifnim min hachoma. Anybody that has property within the wall of the city, harehu kavate arichem. And this will have the halacha of property within a walled city. Chutz min hasados, with the exception of fields, they are excluded from that category. Rabbi Meir Omer af hasados. Rabbi Meir includes fields, which would mean that fields within walled cities could be redeemed within a year, but not after that point. If you've got a house that has been built in the wall, into the outer wall of the city, Rabbi Yehuda says, if it's in the wall itself, it's not going to be considered like a house inside a walled city. Rabbi Shimon says the outer wall is considered like the wall of the city, and therefore, if it's inside the recess of the wall, which is inside the city, it's going to be considered as a wall, a house inside a walled city. Mishnah Vav, Shigagoseha Chomasa, a city where the rooftops constitute a wall, meaning it's kind of built in staggered ways. So the rooftop of one building will be a wall for a different building. So the Mishnah says, and it's a city that is not surrounded by a wall from the time of Yoshua. It's not going to be considered like a house in a walled city. These are the cities which are considered to contain houses inside a walled city. Shalosh chatzeros, if it has 3 courtyards. Shel shnei batim, with 2 houses in each. Mukafas choma mimos Yeshua ben Nun, and it has walls surrounding the city from the time of Yeshua ben Nun. So, for example, Kagon, Katzra Hayashana Shel Tziporim, the ancient fort of Tzipori, the Chakra, the fortress Shel Gush Chalav, of Gush Chalav, the Yodfas Hayashana, the ancient place of Yodfas, the Gamla, the place of Gamla, the Gadud, the city of Gadud, the Chadid, the city of Chadid, the Ono, and the city of Ono, the Yerushalayim, and the city of Yerushalayim, the Chen Kayez Behen, and other similar cities that fulfill this criteria. They are going to be Batei Arei Choma. Mishnah Zayin, Batei Achatzerim, houses in unwalled courtyards, Nosnim Lahem Koach Hayafer Sheba Batei Arei Choma. They are given the benefits, as it were, of a house contained in a walled city, the Koach Hayafer Sheba Sados, and it's given the perks of being like a field. Nig Alin, it can be redeemed at any point in the 50 years. V'nig Alin Miyad, and they can be redeemed immediately within the 12 months. V'nig Alin Kol Shnei Masar Chodesh Kabatim, and they can be redeemed for all of the 12 months, just like the houses of a walled city. V'yotzim Biyovel, and they can also go back to the original owner after 50 years. Uvigron kesef kasados, and they can be redeemed earlier than that with a per annum deduction. Ve'elu hein batei chatzerim. And this is what we mean when we say houses of unwalled courtyards. Shtei chatzeros, when you have 2 courtyards. Shel shnei shnei batim, with 2 houses in each. Afash pi shemukafim chama mimos Yeshua ben Nun, even if it had been surrounded by a wall from the time of Yoshua. The halachic status is like a house of unwalled courtyards. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, we move into our final Mishnah for this evening. Yisrael sheyarash avi imo Levi, a Yisrael who inherited a house in a walled city from his father's mother, who was a Levi. Eino goel kaseda hazer. He does not redeem the house in accordance with the procedure like we have seen in the previous Mishnahs. Rather, if he was to sell on this inherited house, he can redeem it like a Levi. V'chein Levi sheyorash is avi imo Yisrael, and a Levi who inherited a house in a walled city from his father's mother, who was a Yisrael, eino goel kaseda hazer, he would not redeem in accordance with what we've seen. Shneimar ki batei arei halavim, because there's a separate thing, there's a separate verse. As the houses of the cities of Levi's, of Leviim, are their possession. So this indicates that that they will always be able to that the ability to always redeem the house of a Levi does not apply unless Ad Shehe Levi Uvari Halavim Divrei Rabbi, according to Rabbi, until the one selling the house is a Levi, and the house is located in the cities of the Leviim. So if those criteria are met, the laws of redemption are not going to be as we have seen. The Chachamim say, this is only the case with houses in the cities of the Leviim, even if the owner is not a Levi. When it comes to the cities of the Leviim, where there were 2,000 amos surrounding their cities, 1,000 amos of migrash, which is empty land, and 1,000 amos of fields and vineyards. So the Mishnah says, "Ein osim sadeh migrash v'lo migrash sadeh." You can't make a field to be like the migrash, the empty lot, the empty space, and you can't make the empty lot to have the status of a field. V'lo migrash v'lo migrash, and you can't make the migrash into the status of a city, of the actual space of the city, or vice versa. Amar Rabbi Eliezer says, "Bamed dvarim amurim." What are we talking about over here? Ba'arei haLeviim, with regards to the cities of the Leviim. Aval ba'arei Yisrael, but when it comes to the cities of the Israelites, then these things can be redesignated. Osin sadeh migrash, you can make a field into the migrash. V'lo migrash sadeh, you can't make the migrash into a field. Migrash you can make the migrash into the city. V'lo migrash, but you cannot make the city into the migrash. Because if you were to designate part of the city as empty space, then you're going to end up destroying valuable Israeli property, or property in the land of Israel. And so therefore you weren't allowed to do that. Kohanim and Leviim were allowed to sell their fields, and they were allowed to sell their homes, they were allowed to sell their properties always, and they were allowed to redeem them always. They had this extra benefit, they had this extra privilege. The Leviim shall have a perpetual right of redemption. And since Kohanim are part of the tribe of Levi, they too would be included in that halacha. Ad kan for today. Mazel tov on completing chapter 9 of Maseches Arachin. Mazel tov on completing the whole Masechet of Maseches Arachin. And together let's all say, Nishlama Maseches Arachin, Nishlama Maseches Arachin, Nishlama Maseches Arachin. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us. Mazel tov again for completing. And we will see you all next time when we will enter into the exciting world of Maseches Tamura. Take care, everyone.